All right, everyone. This is Jerry from Biznet. We're going to kick off this webinar. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. Give me 1 second. And I think you can see my desktop. What I'm going to do is bump over to a slide presentation we've got to at least for the beginning of the session. First of all, we want to welcome everyone who's attended what is, I think, our 5th or 6th in a series of weekly webinars. We call it Biznet Bootcamp webinar. Today's topic is creating lists in SharpSpring. Just to let you know who we are, I'm Jerry. I'm also joined here by Alyssa. Alyssa is our digital marketing strategist. We're the dynamic duo that goes on the road conducting our live Biznet Bootcamps. So those of you who have attended one of those, welcome back. Just to identify who you are, who these webinars are intended for. They're intended for existing Biznet marketing automation clients. You most likely attended a Bootcamp live session, but if not, that's okay. You are using marketing automation, hopefully. At the least, you have an account in SharpSpring, and you're licensed to use it. You have the login, and most likely you're probably in need of some refresher training. That's why you're signing in today. The bootcamp sessions that we do are 4 hours long, and they actually probably cover about 6 hours worth of material. So we recognize people may need some refresher training. With that said, just to recap what these webinars are about, they're short extensions of Bootcamp Live. We try to keep them to 30 minutes. The idea being, somebody can give up 30 minutes in their day, sit in, get some quick refresher training, and then move on with the rest of their busy schedule. One thing we have done, this is the first session that we are holding at 11 a.m. on Thursdays. Prior to this, we had been doing them at 2 p.m. We had gotten some feedback from people that the middle of the afternoon on a Thursday wasn't the best time. So we figured Thursday, it's getting later in the week, just before lunchtime. People, we offered up some different times. People thought Thursday at 11 would be a good alternative. So this is our first Thursday at 11 session. We are recording this session. We do make them available on our Biznet SharpSpring login page. We're kind of tweaking that page a little bit right now, but we'll share a link with everybody so that you can easily go back and view the sessions. Up till now, we have done creating workflows, creating tasks, importing lists, some of the basics. So we'll add this session to that. You're free to submit questions during today's session. You are muted, so we won't be able to hear you if you talk, but you should see a questions panel in the control panel from GoToWebinar, and you can submit a question there. Alyssa's here in the room with me. She'll catch them, and then we can either answer them in the flow of the presentation or at the end. And then one other heads up, given that we mute these sessions and they tend to be a one-way push communication channel, we are going to start up bi-weekly go-to meetings that are going to kind of be like a user group open forum type session, whereby we probably won't even pick a topic. We'll just all log in, and if you've got issues, questions, problems, you bring them to the table. It'll be kind of a first come, first served basis. We'll work through helping you work through those issues and go from there. So look for an invite to those. Okay, today's topic, creating lists. Lists are one of the key components of marketing automation and SharpSpring. Obviously, a key element of SharpSpring is emailing. To email, you need lists. So list is one of the 3 key legs of the stool when it comes to email and marketing automation. Today what we're going to focus on is how to create a new list, understanding the different types of lists you can create, how to add filters and triggers to a list, those rules that define who's going to be in the list and who's not. We'll then show how to generate that list. We'll show you how to view the results of the list you created, and then sometimes most importantly, how to go back and modify and update the list because perhaps you didn't apply the right filter or things have changed or whatever. There's also some other capabilities regarding list that we'll review. I apologize for that pop-up that keeps appearing. I hopefully just clicked the right option to make it go away. Before we get started, or actually I'm going to keep going along, but if anybody's got any questions, feel free to submit them via the questions panel, and we'll tackle them accordingly. So I'm going to bump over to our SharpSpring installation, and we actually have this Biznet Bootcamp test environment that we've been using as we conduct the Bootcamp live sessions. So we're going to use that. We've got a little bit of data in here that we're familiar with, and it gives us some good opportunities to talk about list creation. I actually want to take before we dump into list creation. You know, obviously, when you go to populate your SharpSpring instance, you're probably most likely importing a list. You know, you may have a database of people. Most people start out by saying, hey, I got 2,000 contacts are in Excel. I converted it to CSV. You import those people. So now they're in your database. So now let's say you're out there messaging and people are visiting your website and you're tracking them and you got all kinds of activity. Let's say then a couple months later you go buy a list and you import more people and you've got people filling out forms and you know you're growing your contact manager database organically, and now you realize, wow, we want to go create a custom list of people who like did something, you know, what did they do that we want to then message around, which gives me a good opportunity to talk about some of the list creation capabilities in SharpSpring and what you might do. So lists build on the same functionality as tasks. Those who have done any task building will recognize that. Lists can be created using any field within SharpSpring, default field, custom field, otherwise it doesn't matter. And then, as I said, you can, based upon the behaviors of the people who are coming to your website or engaging with your email, you can generate lists off that. This is a very critical comment here. Rule-based lists are better than manual lists. We're going to talk about those when I jump back into SharpSpring. But it's better if you are creating a rule-based list, because then you can go back later and modify that list and have new people added to it. If you do something manually, there's no real connection between how you created the list and that person who's in the list. If they get deleted or removed, they're gone. You'd have to manually add them back. So that's kind of a word to the wise. We had a client this week who ran into a problem because they went and deleted a list they had imported unbeknownst to them. A lot of those people were attached to rule-based lists. So I'm going to jump back to SharpSpring here. So lists, you get the list under the automation menu. So I'm going to click lists here. And actually you can, if you scroll down over on the left, you got an add new list button, or up top right, we got this ubiquitous green new button. I'm going to use that. I'm going to go create a new list. So the first, what I'm presented with on this screen is pretty elementary. I have to give my name, or my list a name. I can add a description. It's always helpful, to add a description, especially if you've got a shared environment where other people might be coming in and wondering what is this list. I'm going to name mine. The next option you get here is a checkbox that you see throughout SharpSpring that gives you the option to make this list available in Contact Manager. Without going too deep off the deep end what that means, a hint is anytime you see this thing, turn it on. I've had many experiences where I didn't do this, and then I had to go back, come in, pull this list up or other elements, and turn this thing on. So I just turn it on by default. Your next option is to identify whether you want this list to be rules-based, which means people will get added to it based upon a set of criteria that we're gonna determine ourselves, or do you want this to be a manual list? Given the caution statement I just made, be selective about why you might be creating a manual list. If you have a very narrow specific need to specifically add people, and then you're never really going to worry about growing that list organically, use manual. Otherwise, my suggestion is use rule-based. So you fill out these basic fields, make your choices, and you click Create List. Now we'll be bumped into the more detailed list creation screen. We're again presented with our name and our description. You can add to this if you want. The next critical portion of this page is this dynamic or static area. And what this allows you to do is identify whether you want your list to be dynamic, which means, as the description says, people will be added to it as they meet the criteria and the rules that we're about to set up. So if you're going to create this list and you think, yeah, as people fill out a form or open an email or open future emails, I want them to be added. I don't want to have to come back in here and have to add them. Then you would want to turn on the dynamic list. It's an organically growing list. This is one of those automation elements that SharpSpring offers. At the same time, you have the ability, as part of a dynamic list, to say, do you want the rules that we apply to go backwards in time and find people in your current database who meet these rules and put them in this list? If you're not worried about that and you want this to just be a forward-facing list that will grow from this day forward, you would turn this off. Conversely, if you're like, oh, I'm coming along now and building this list because I didn't build it 3 months ago, and I want to catch those people who met this criteria, you would turn this feature on. We tend to turn this on. You can come, I'll show you in a moment how you can come back and modify a list. So if you turn this on and realize you didn't need it, you can deactivate it. Build only once, as opposed to dynamic, means we're going to set all these rules, we're going to build this list, and then the list as we build it today is going to be static. If it captures 50 people, it's never going to go beyond 50 people. There's a caveat to that rule I'll show you, but conversely, making it dynamic means, hey, it captures 50 people today. It might be a 75-member list 6 months from now when those other 25 people meet the criteria. What I'm going to do is build this one as a build only once. Now when you scroll down, you get this section, this triggers and filters section of the page, that for those of you who have built tasks or have, recall the task building portion of our training, you'll recognize this kind of construct. This is very familiar to how you build tasks. And in fact, list building in this way is essentially tasks without adding a workflow to it. So it's very powerful in that regard. You get a little bit more freedom and flexibility, especially when you're building once. You don't have to worry about triggers versus filters. You're kind of exposed to every potential rule. So with that in mind, what you can do is say, hey, you know what? I want to build a list that, for example, people who filled out a form, and again, I'm using our Bootcamp instance, so I know that I created an attendance form. I'm going to go find that form and say, on this list, I want people who filled out the attendance form anytime. I don't care if it was on hours or off hours. And I'm going to set that as my first rule. So right off the bat, anybody in our database who's filled out this attendance form at any time is going to be added to this list. At the same time, I want to be a little more selective. As part of our Bootcamp training, we use kind of a color-coordinated team orientation. So I only want to involve members of the blue team as blue team members who filled out this form. So what I'm going to say is, and actually I'm going to take a moment and look at our options here in what you can pick from among these rules and filters. And as I said, these are very familiar to those who have built tasks. But you have, people who filled out a form, a particular form, any form, or did not fill out a form. Lead actions, these are people who have fields or a lead score, or maybe are owned by a particular salesperson. A lot of times you may have salespeople say, hey, you know what, I want to build a list that's only my people. So you can set up those criteria, and then you can say is owned by. I'll give you a glimpse of what you get in here. I could say I want only people who are owned by Jerry the salesperson. I'm not going to do that in this case, but you could say is not owned by. You can build a list that's everybody except Jerry's people. You could build a list of people who visits an important page, visits any page. So all kinds of behavioral-based, end-user behavioral-based activities or criteria you can pick from. And as I said, when you say has the field, you then get the option to choose from any of the fields you have built or that SharpSpring ships with. In our case, we have a custom field built for people who attend the boot camp. it identifies their team color. And so I'm going to pick team color. And now our team color custom field is a drop-down type field from which people identify their team color. As I said, I want to capture people who have the field team color as part of their profile, and that team color designation is blue. And I'm going to say exactly, I'm going to add that rule. So now I've created a list, a set of rules that are going to build a list of people who filled out a form or are a part of Team Blue. But you know what? So this is a pretty broad. When you think of, go back to high school or college logic and Venn diagrams, and you know, we've got two circles. We got people who filled out the form, people who were Team Blue. We're going to grab people from both of those circles. However, I only want people who did both. So, you know, imagine those two circles crossing in that little cross section. So I'm going to set my rules to say when all. And what it does is, if you notice, I'm going to go back and say when any, you get, you know, the bar up here is green, and you got that or statement. So it's an either or. I'm going to say when all, the color changes to signify you've got an all statement. And now it's both of these criteria have to be true. Somebody filled out the form, somebody has blue, or is part of Team Blue. Now I'm going to save these changes, and SharpSpring bumps you to this page, letting you know that your list request is in their job queue. Sometimes if you're building a huge list, multiple thousand lists, it could take several minutes. I built one for a client the other day that had two separate lists actually. One had 8,600 people in it, one had 7,900 people in it. It took SharpSpring a few minutes to generate those lists. But while this is building, you can actually leave this screen, go back to your list view, and what I can go down, you can see that this list is updating. What I did earlier prior to the session today is I built kind of a similar list to what I just built. So while that one's in the queue working, I'm going to use my other example to demonstrate what I want to show. To see the members of your list, first of all, this screen shows me there's 15 members in this list, and that's actually an identification of active emails. So these are people who haven't unsubscribed or bounced. To see the members of the list, you click the list name, and you're taken to this view. This is the members tab. So these are all the people who met the criteria of this list. I think I built it the same. However, that raises a good segue into, let's say you're like, oh, I didn't give this a description. I'm not even sure who's on this list. From this view, if you click on options, you're exposed to a whole variety of features and capabilities with lists. I'm going to quick hit a few and focus on some of the more critical ones. Exporting is what it says. You could export all of the members. You could export anybody who may have shown up on the exclusions tab. For example, let's say you built a list, you emailed people, you invited them to an event. You now generate a list of people who actually filled out the form and registered because you want to send, your caterer, I don't know, he's making name tags, or wherever the event's at, they're going to make name tags for people. You could generate a list here and then export it out to CSV and ship it off to that vendor and say, there you go, there's their names and company. Send email to a list. If you generate a list and you've got a ready-made email, you can do that from here. If you've got a workflow, you can apply it to this list. If you want to merge a list, you can do that using the Add Leads from List feature. You can create a random sample list from this main list. You could split this list. You could remove this list, which means we're going to kind of deactivate this list. The people in the list will still stay in Contact Manager. They'll still be there. It's just we're going to remove this from our list of lists. Not to be redundant, the list of lists that you have. Remove members from list means you're going to keep the list, but you're going to remove the people in it. Again, the people are still going to be in Contact Manager. You would potentially have an empty list, but the list is still there. Unsubscribe leads and list means these people will stay in this list, but you're now going to unsubscribe them from receiving emails from you. To be honest, I've never had occasion to use this, but I don't know. Maybe you invited people to an event and they all stood up en masse and said, stop sending us emails. And you're like, oh, I have them on the list. I'm going to go unsubscribe them. kind of an esoteric use or function, but rebuild list I'm going to wait to show, because the two critical features I want to show in here are rebuild list and change list settings. But before we do that, delete all leads and lists is the, it's like detonating this list and the members and deleting the list and also removing the members from Contact Manager. So this is kind of the ultimate purge. That's why it's in red down here and it's got an X next to it. So use this cautiously. All right, so let's say you built this list and you're like, man, I forgot what I even did with what the criteria was. Or, I built this list and I didn't get the results I expected. I need to change it. If you use this change list settings, you're bumped back to that view that we had when we created the list. A couple of words of caution. SharpSpring tends to want to recognize this as a dynamic list, even though we built it only once. So I'm going to switch it back to be a build only once. But I could now come in here and I have access to these rules again, and I could either delete a rule and add a different one. I could add a new rule. So let's say, I want to say is not owned by, let's say red admin. I'm pretty sure that these blue members aren't. So I'm going to add that rule too. So now, I've set a second criteria. Again, I could make it an all. I could make it an or. I'm going to keep it an all. And then I can rerun this list. SharpSpring will prompt me with this message saying, hey, dude, you changed the rules. Are you sure you want to do this? And I'm going to say, yes, I'm sure, because I didn't do it right the first time. And then you'll get presented with this familiar list is being created screen. And you can go back to lists and view that list. So those are both still updating. The other, I can still pull this up, even though it's kind of in the queue. The other feature I want to point out is, as we showed, I originally built this list as a build once, which means it's not going to grow dynamically and organically. I have to grow it, but I can do that by, I'm going to back space out, go back to list. Let's say, I suppose here's a real world example of how to use the rebuild list feature. I have a client for whom we have 15,000 people in their email database. We send out a monthly email. It goes out to everybody. Invariably, every month, a few people unsubscribe, a few people spam us. We get some hard bounces. We get soft bounces that turn into hard bounces. And so I have a list set up. I'm going to bump over there, and I don't think they mind if I showed you what we've got set up for them. I have a list created that says my criteria are everyone who has a valid email address and everyone who is not a hard bounce or not an unsubscribe. And I have these rules set up here, and I regenerate this list every month. Why? So that just before I'm about to send their monthly email, I have a good, clean, pure list. Nobody on that list is bounced. Nobody's unsubscribed. That gets me a better quality score going through the email sender. If I send to a list that's got, if it's a 100-member list and 20 have unsubscribed and I know 5 are hard bounces, that's going to factor into my quality score. So what I do every month is I use the rebuild feature on this list, and I regenerate every month so that, like, I'll go here and I'll say rebuild this list, and I get prompted, and am I sure I want to do this? And I say yes, rebuild. Now I probably could build this as a dynamic list and it would do this itself, but I don't know. I'd like to have a little bit of control over this kind of stuff. So, and I also get some feedback. What happens is, between last month and this month, I can go into my list and say, oh, look, since last month we've had, however many exclusions, meaning people who unsubscribed or had bad email address. So it's a way to keep a list clean. But to reiterate kind of the key points we talked about, you can create lists at any time. If you've got data or characteristics or behaviors on people that are stored in SharpSpring, you can use that to generate a list specific to what you need it for. You may want to, examples of lists you create. If someone received, opened, and clicked an email, you know, they're more engaged. Maybe you want to generate a list of those people and send them a follow-up email. If someone filled out a form, you could generate a list of just those people. You know, at the same time, you could, as we showed, generate a list of people who opened the email, clicked, went to the website, filled out the form, and are owned by a particular, you know, salesperson. And then the converse is you could create lists of the negatives of those people who didn't do any of those activities. So yeah, list building is pretty powerful. It's essentially tasks without having to attach a workflow. I've seen people, and I even did this when I first got into SharpSpring, is I'd say, oh yeah, I'm going to set up a task that says if people got an email, clicked through, filled out a form, and are owned by Jerry, and then I would create a workflow that said add them to a list. And then I realized, wait, I don't have to have that workflow. I can build the list on that criteria and save myself a step. I could then use the workflow to say, if part of this Jerry list, send them that follow-up email. And that way, you're kind of, you know, you're minimizing the amount of moving parts you've got in your SharpSpring instance. But yeah, if you think of list as shortcuts on tasks, I think it'll help you understand how you can use them. So that being said, I think we've reached the conclusion of today's presentation. Alyssa, have we gotten any questions? I don't see that we have. I want to thank those of you who have attended. We actually did get a few more attendees today at 11 than we traditionally had gotten at 2, so it seems like the 11 a.m. time is more conducive. As I said, we'll be sending out an email that will include a link to where we are storing the recording of this session. Feel free to share it with your colleagues. And we will also be sending out an invite to what is going to start out as a bi-weekly user group open forum quote-unquote therapy session. You know, bring your problems to us. We'll take them first come, first serve, talk them through, help, you know, and potentially it can be kind of a group learning experience. So that being said, we want to thank you for attending today. Just to reinforce again, I'm Jerry. This is Alyssa. You know, if you got any questions in the interim, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you for attending, and we will look forward to seeing you next week.